Ms. LaViolette, you are still under oath. Do you understand?
Yes, I do.
Mrs. Wilmot, you may continue.
Thank you, Honor. Good morning, Ms. LaViolette.
Good morning.
I want to start talking a little bit about some of the other things that you've done throughout your career, okay?
All right.
Have you ever worked with police before?
Yes, I started doing volunteer training with the police in 1980, first in the squad room with officers around the issue of restraining orders and protective orders that law had just gone into effect in 1980, and then into cadet academy, and then into advanced officer training. And I did that probably for at least about 10 years until the police department started doing all its own training in-house, and then I stopped doing that.
All right, and have you ever worked with large corporations?
Well, actually, I've done some training in corporations, like the Housing Authority, and that sort of thing, but I am on the board, the advisory board of the Corporate Alliance to End Partner Violence.
What is that?
It's an organization that was formed by State Farm Insurance because back in the 90s, State Farm stopped insuring women who claimed they were battered women, or where they knew they were battered women. They were counting it as a pre-existing condition. And so there was a lot of bad press that went out with State Farm, and they thought they had to do something about that. And they did. They pulled together 100 people from around the country who were educators, business people, and people who worked in domestic violence. And we put together a plan to have corporations and other organizations and domestic violence folks work together to prevent violence. And so they're working with lots of organizations. Liz Claiborne is one of them. Mary Kay is one of them. They have people from the NFL. But State Farm has continued to do that. And I'm on the advisory board, which actually means I do pretty much nothing. My name's just on the advisory board.
But did you do something when it first started?
I did. I worked really hard for 3 days when we worked 12-hour days to put this plan together.
All right. And when was this?
It was the mid-90s, but I'm not sure the exact year.
Okay. And when you're doing trainings and you're giving a speech, I would imagine, to a group of people, do you ever, in those trainings, I mean, it's obviously about a very serious topic, but do you ever use humor in your trainings?
I do use humor in my trainings.
Why is that?
I use humor in my trainings because it's such a serious topic and because it's hard for people to listen. And some of my trainings are all-day trainings, but even if they're 2-hour trainings, it helps people to take it in. It's easier to listen if you can occasionally laugh and spend some of the tension that you have when you're hearing about things like this. So, for instance, I tend to say things kind of spontaneously, and I was asked once why people come into my program. Why would they?
It explains what she does with regard to training. It goes to her experience.
They ask, why would people come into your program? And I said, well, for the most part, people don't come into my program because they think personal growth is far out and they can't wait to do it. That they come in either because their partners leave or threaten to leave and they really take that seriously, or God speaks to them through the SWAT team and they have a religious experience. And so people thought that was funny and they laughed at it. And I also said that I think it's a very hard thing for people to ask for help. That asking for help when you hurt people that you love is a very difficult thing. And so being able to sort of balance that out helps people to listen and helps people to take things in, I think.
All right. And in your experience, have you ever worked with the military?
I currently work with the military, but it's in a program called Heroes and Healthy Families. I do training. I've done training at 29 Palms, Camp Pendleton, and Barstow for the Marines, and for both the family services folks in the Marines and also for the Marines themselves. Heroes and Healthy Families is a really wonderful program that a judge in California, Judge Isles, and her court assistant, Leslie Howard, put together. And it's basically to expand the notion of not leaving your buddies behind, to include mental health issues. And it's supported by the generals. It's a really wonderful program. And what they do is they expand the notion to suicide, homicide, child abuse, spouse abuse, substance abuse, and they have speakers on all of those topics. In fact, there's a YouTube video that I didn't put on there. I found out, one of my friends called and said, "You're on YouTube, Alice." I didn't know I was. And it was from Heroes in Healthy Families, and it's on PTSD and domestic violence. And so they use all of those videos, and they have people from the military speak, primarily from the military speak, and then I speak for those groups too. And they're usually 600 to 800 enlisted men, sergeants, usually enlisted men that come. And then there are retired military. We've had Congressional Medal of Honor winners speak about wishing they had gotten help and that sort of thing. So it's very moving.
You talked a little bit about when you first started in the late 70s and early 80s that domestic violence wasn't something that people really paid attention to. Is that right?
That's correct.
In the beginning, when you first started training and speaking about domestic violence and battered women, did you ever face any type of discrimination or type of name calling, being called things like a man hater or being accused of things like that?
Objection, relevance.
Approach. You may proceed.
Thank you. So, Ms. LaViolette, did you face that type of discrimination when you first started?
Yes, I did. And I think for the most part, people in the movement did. And part of it was justified, I think, because there was a lot of anger in the movement at that time to get things done and to try to see laws changed and that sort of thing, because there weren't any laws at that time. But I think pretty quickly people
Objection beyond the scope of the question.
Sustained.
May we approach? All right, so during this discrimination, what kind of discrimination did you face?
people seeing us as angry, people seeing us as prejudiced, people seeing us as trying to push an issue that wasn't worth pushing, that sort of thing.
Okay, and ultimately, did you told us yesterday that you actually worked with men.
Yes, I do work with men.
And that's from the beginning up until present day, is that right?
That's from within the first 6 months.
Okay.
Yes.
And from the beginning until present day, have you worked with women as well?
Yes, I work with men and women.
All right. Since you started taking cases for forensic reasons, in court-type cases, child custody and criminal cases, I think you told us that you've done about 16 to 18 for the defense and about 9 for the prosecution.
Yes.
In that time, have you ever been asked to represent somebody or be retained as an expert and turned a case down?
Yes, I have. I've turned down more than one case.
All right. And what are reasons why you turned down a case?
Objection, relevance.
Approach. Proceed.
When you've turned down cases, have you done that because you didn't have enough time to dedicate to that particular case?
Yes, in fact,
Objection, the only scope of the question.
So have you recently turned down a case?
I turned down a case yesterday.
Okay. And is that because you don't have enough time to dedicate to it?
Objection has been answered.
Overruled.
It's because I didn't have time to do a good job on a case, and I don't want to do a case unless I can do a good job on a case.
All right. And also, have you turned down cases because there's not enough information there for you to make a good analysis?
Yes, I've turned down cases where I didn't feel there was enough evidence to merit my participation in that case.
Okay. Now, you've been, have you testified before
Yes,
in other cases?
I've testified about 18 times.
18 times, okay.
Yes.
And have you ever testified or worked on behalf of, been retained by people who were representing a man?
Yes,
So have you ever testified on behalf of a man?
I was actually sitting in court to testify and was not called, but I sat there for 6 hours ready to testify.
Okay, and that for a client who was a man?
Yes,
Okay.
who was accused of domestic violence.
Oh, okay. So he was accused of domestic violence and you were on his side of the case.
Well, he was accused of domestic violence, and I was able to get him into a...
Objection beyond the scope of the question. She's being asked whose side she represented.
Sustained.
Okay. Were you retained by his defense?
I was retained in a family law case. It wasn't a...
Not criminal.
It wasn't a criminal case.
Okay. And have you testified when clients have been women?
Yes, I have.
All right. And obviously you're testifying in this case. Were you retained in this case?
Yes, I was.
And do you remember when you were retained?
I was, I think, first interviewed in September of 2011, and I began working on the case in October of 2011.
Did you say, when were you first interviewed? September, did you say?
I think the very end of September or the beginning of October.
Okay. In 2011?
Yes.
And are you being paid on this case?
Yes, I am.
And how much do you get paid an hour?
$250 an hour for research and $300 an hour for court appearance.
All right. I want to talk to you some more about some of the articles that you've created, or that you've written, I guess.
Yes.
Did you ever write an article in a journal that for child custody?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And in doing so, did you ever author something called a continuum of aggression and abuse?
Yes, I did.
And what is that?
The continuum of aggression and abuse is a way to look at domestic violence and aggression that can also occur in otherwise healthy families, isolated acts of aggression. And it looks at a range of behavior and a range of responses, and then looks at some exacerbating factors that can play into these cases. It's so that we don't look at domestic violence in kind of a one-dimensional way, but look at a real range. And part of that is to be able to look at how we intervene in these cases so that we're intervening more effectively.
All right. How did you go about making something like this?
Well, initially I saw a continuum that was created by Michael Johnson in 1994. And he had a continuum that was anchored on one side with what was called common couple violence, and the other side with patriarchal terrorism, because what he was looking at were men who were in batters intervention programs. And he was looking at what was called common couple violence, which was what he called most of domestic violence, which was hitting, pushing, slapping, grabbing, and what he called mild injury. And then looking at patriarchal terrorism, which was looking at not only extreme domestic violence, but the use of the system, whether that be a spiritual system, whether that be a criminal justice system, whether that be a child custody system, whether that's finances, but use of the system. And I liked that he did a continuum, but I thought it needed to have more points on the continuum than just two.
So how do you do that? If you have a continuum but you wanted to add more data to it or more information to it?
I wanted to add more breadth to it, but I also wanted to look at the fact that in healthy families, there can be isolated acts of aggression that happen in those families, and that we don't call everything domestic violence, that we look at a context that it's occurring in so that we're better able to describe it.
So is that part of what you did when you created the continuum?
Yes, I did that. And I also used, there was research done in the 90s by Amy Holdsworth Monroe and Gregory Stewart. And what they did was they took 10 pieces of research and they kind of put them together. And they took the similarities from each of those pieces of research and created what were called behavioral typologies, which are simply what are the similar behaviors in each of these groups of abusive people. And they were like family only, people who don't do anything outside of the family, and pretty much it's very hidden from everybody else, and moved to what was called borderline or dysphoric or overly controlled hostile, which are people that would act out more in public as well. And then they used antisocial. And antisocial were people that usually had some sort of experience in the criminal justice system, may have been arrested, may have a rap sheet, that sort of thing.
All right. Did you use that information to help create your continuum?
I used that, and I used my experience, and also I network regularly with people in the field. I'm in an organization, we meet monthly, and I talk to other people who are doing the work,